Every 30 to 50 miles along the Ohio Turnpike, a service plaza sits open. Not open during business hours. Open right now, at whatever hour you happen to be reading this, every day of the year, including Christmas. That single operational fact, printed in plain language on the Ohio Turnpike Commission's own website, tells you more about the American roadside than any postcard of a neon diner sign ever could. It also happens to be almost identical on paper to the law in Britain. UK regulations require motorway services to sit no more than 28 miles apart and to remain open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Two countries, two nearly identical rulebooks, and yet the traveler experience at each end of that comparison has become one of the most consistent talking points in road trip content. American rest stops as pleasant surprise, European ones as something to be endured. If the regulations rhyme this closely, the gap has to be coming from somewhere other than the law. That gap is the actual subject of this piece. Case 1. The Ohio Turnpike and what 24 hours actually means. The Ohio Turnpike runs 241 miles across the northern part of the state, carrying I-90, I-80 and I-76 traffic at different points along its length. Service plazas are spaced every 30 to 50 miles, and per the Turnpike Commission, every one of them operates 24 hours a day, every day of the year, holidays included. That is not a slogan. It is a maintenance and staffing commitment. Someone is scheduled to be behind the counter at 3 a.m. on New Year's Day every year at every plaza on the route. Here is the moment that put this on camera, run whole, uncut, rather than sliced into 5 separate insert points, the way this kind of segment usually gets edited.
Today, we are in Ohio at an institution for American road trips, and that is the rest stop. We're on the Ohio Turnpike, and on the Ohio Turnpike, they actually have pretty decent rest areas here, and if you like to visit, you can always get your coffee, you can refresh on fast food, of course, that's double the price. And I'm just wondering, if you're someone who has road trip throughout your life, or if you're someone who still does it, what are some memories you have of road trips and rest stops? Don't they go hand in hand? You can't go, too far without stopping. So tell me some memories you guys have. One memory I always have as a kid is coming to the rest stops and looking at the giant maps on the wall, figuring out where you are, where you're trying to go. I don't know, when I was a kid, it was always something that was just super fascinating to me.
Two things in that clip are worth pulling apart because they point in different directions. First, he says, visit, not stop. Second, he flags the price markup on fast food without complaint, almost as an aside. Those two details together are the actual case study, not vague warmth toward American infrastructure, but a specific transaction he has priced into his expectations and decided is worth it anyway. That is a consumer judgment, not a nostalgia trip, even though the childhood memory detail at the end adds the nostalgia layer on top of it. The double the price line deserves a real explanation rather than a hand wave. Ohio Turnpike plazas are not run by outside franchisees bidding independently for each location. The Commission contracts food and fuel service under the Turnpike's own concession structure, and pricing reflects the cost of guaranteeing staffed, lit, heated service around the clock at a captive location with no walk-in competition for miles. You are not being charged more because there's nowhere else to go, in the scarcity sense a stranded traveler on a rural road might recognize. You're being charged more because someone is being paid to be there at 3 a.m. whether or not a single car pulls in that hour. It's a staffing cost passed through as a menu price, not a monopoly tax. That distinction matters for the comparison to come because it turns out the UK's regulatory baseline is not actually the weak link people assume it is. Before getting to that comparison though, it's worth staying with the Ohio Turnpike long enough to see what the 24-hour commitment actually buys, because open all night undersells what's on offer. In early 2026, the Ohio Turnpike's Tiffin River Service Plaza, near West Unity, was named the top truck stop in the entire United States by Trucker Path, a navigation app used by commercial drivers based on ratings pulled from more than 1 million users. That's not a marketing claim the Turnpike Commission generated about itself. It's an outside, aggregated ranking built from the people who actually depend on that plaza being reliable at 2 a.m., because their schedules don't leave room for a bad stop. Tiffin River's specific features are unglamorous on paper: a 110-space commercial lot, separate restrooms, free showers, coin-operated laundry, a food court, and a convenience store. None of that is retro or photogenic. It's the kind of infrastructure that only gets noticed when it's missing. The Turnpike Commission has also built out overnight parking specifically for commercial drivers at 8 of its plazas, each with a dedicated lounge offering free 24-hour access, television, Wi-Fi, private shower suites, and coin laundry alongside RV lots with electrical hookups and dump stations. None of that shows up in a 43-second clip of someone grabbing coffee. It's the layer underneath the visit, the part of the infrastructure a passing driver benefits from without ever seeing it directly because someone budgeted for it years before that driver's car ever left the driveway. That's the actual argument for calling the rest stop an institution, and it's a stronger one than tone or nostalgia. The Ohio Turnpike didn't happen to end up reliable. It was built plaza by plaza, decade by decade, as infrastructure aimed specifically at the people driving it hardest, long-haul truckers and RV travelers, with everyone else riding along on the same standard. The counter-argument the format usually skips here is where most videos and scripts on this subject cut a corner. They treat the American rest stop as a triumph over a European system that closes at night. That claim does not hold up against the actual British rulebook, and a script built on sourced comparison has to say so plainly. UK law, under the current Department for Transport circular governing motorway service areas, requires that core services be spaced no more than 28 miles apart and mandates 24-hour opening 365 days a year with a minimum of 2 hours free parking, lit and under CCTV, and free toilets available with no obligation to purchase anything. On paper, that is a more prescriptive welfare standard than anything the Ohio Turnpike publishes. Britain didn't invent the close at midnight and leave you stranded motorway station. That was never legal in the first place. Who leased the land is one level down from the site itself. The 24-hour requirement covers the site, fuel, parking, toilets, but it does not compel every individual retailer inside that site to staff their counter around the clock. UK service areas are mostly run by one of 3 large operators, so a site can be legally open 24 hours, while the one hot food counter that was staffed at 6 p.m. has gone dark by 10, because that particular franchisee decided the overnight traffic didn't justify the payroll. The site stays open. The sandwich stops. That's a genuinely different failure mode than closed, and it's worth naming precisely because it's more interesting than the flattened version. The American rest stop advantage isn't that it's open when the European one is shut by law. Both are required to be open. Runs the full plaza, coffee counter included, under one staffing plan, instead of a shared site hosting several independently scheduled retail tenants who can each opt out of the 3 a.m. shift on their own. One system has one entity answering for the whole night. The other has several, and only one of them, the site operator, not the sandwich shop, is actually bound by the law. Both approaches have a real trade-off. The single-operator turnpike model produces more consistent overnight service but less brand variety. You get the plaza's food court, not a competitive lineup of chains bidding for your business. The UK's multi-tenant model produces more choice and often better food quality during daylight hours, at the cost of exactly the overnight consistency that shows up in traveller comments. Neither model is simply worse. They're optimised for different hours of the day. The multi-tenant structure isn't an accident either. It's a direct result of how UK services were built. The first 2, Watford Gap and Newport Pagnell, opened in 1959 and 1960 alongside the M1, Britain's first motorway, and were private sector ventures from the start, not state-run facilities. Today, the vast majority of sites are controlled by 3 companies, Moto, Welcome Break, and Roadchef, who lease the land, often from the Department for Transport under decades-long agreements, and then sublet counter space to individual food brands. Only around 20 sites remain directly government-owned. The Ohio Turnpike, by contrast, has stayed a single public authority operating its own plazas along a state-owned toll road since the 1952. Same original decade, same basic problem: where do drivers stop on a new high-speed road, and 2 different ownership models that have shaped everything downstream of them for the next 70 years. Case 2, Peggy Sue's, and the part of the story that isn't about hours at all. The second location shifts the comparison away from operating hours entirely, because Peggy Sue's 50s Diner is not a legally mandated service area. It's a single, privately owned building on Yermo Road, just off I-15 between Barstow and the Nevada line, roughly 2 hours into the 4-hour run from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Its history is documented, not folklore. The building started in 1954 as a pie shop, built in part from salvaged railroad ties and mortar, sourced from the nearby Union Pacific Rail Yard, a small 3-booth, 9-stool operation that served desert motorists for decades before it went quiet. Peggy Sue and her husband Champ, who had performed together on stage before they were married and who had worked at Knott's Berry Farm, bought the building and reopened it in 1987, building out the pastel, memorabilia-heavy interior that exists today. Here is the second clip, again run whole rather than chopped into fragments, one insert point, not five.
Are you driving Route 66 or making that long trip between LA and Las Vegas? Then you have to stop at Peggy Sue's for that classic American roadside diner experience. It's pretty much bang in the middle of LA and Vegas, about 2 hours into the 4-hour drive, so it makes for the perfect pit stop to refuel. Inside, it's just like the movies, neon signs, jukebox vibes, and waitresses wearing the cutest 1950s style uniforms. There are a few different rooms, the initial diner that opened back in the 50s with the classic booths and stools, and then additional rooms that they've added on over time, including a separate pizza parlour. They serve up the best comfort food, which is very needed after hours on the road. Think pancakes, burgers, shakes and fries. And there's little trivia packs with lots of nostalgic references to keep you entertained while you wait for your food too. Though we didn't see it because it started to go dark, apparently there's also a dinosaur park out the back. And definitely make sure you don't miss the gift shop, which is full of iconic Route 66 souvenirs to take home. The perfect pit stop to add a bit of retro into your road trip.
Everything she describes checks out against independent sources, which is worth stating plainly rather than assuming the few different rooms. Line matches how the site actually grew. Diner, five and dime store, ice cream counter, and a separate pizza parlor were added on at different points, not built as one plan from day one. The booths and stools she mentions from the initial diner are the same fixtures, 3 booths, 9 stools. The building opened within 1954, kept rather than replaced during the 1987 restoration. The detail she almost throws away, we didn't see it because it started to go dark, is the dinosaur park, and it's worth describing precisely instead of gesturing at it, because the specifics are what make it land. Dinosaur Park is a free sculpture garden behind the diner, several 10-foot metal dinosaurs, a King Kong figure, and ponds stocked with live turtles and koi. None of that is set dressing bolted onto a functioning restaurant for content value. It was built as a second attraction on the same lot, and it's the reason people describe Peggy Sue's as a stop worth timing your drive around rather than a stop you make because you have no choice. The menu carries the same logic. The food isn't generic diner fare with a retro logo slapped on it. Items are named after 1,950 seconds figures. A patty melt named for Patty Page, fries named for James Dean, burgers named for John Wayne and Buddy Holly. That's a small mechanism worth naming directly. Menu items as branding devices, turning a meal into a piece of the theme rather than a neutral commodity next to it. A UK service area sandwich case does not do this, and it isn't a failure of British food culture that it doesn't, it's a different business model. A franchise sandwich counter inside a multi-brand service area has no reason to invent a mythology, it's selling convenience, not a destination. Peggy Sue's has spent since 1987 selling the opposite. The economics of a destination that doesn't have to exist. It's worth being precise about what kind of business Peggy Sue's actually is, because roadside diner undersells the structure. It is not one restaurant, it's a small cluster of businesses sharing one lot. The original 1954 diner room, the added rooms that came later, a separate pizza parlor, a five and dime retail store with an ice cream counter and soda fountain, and the free dinosaur park out back. Nothing about that layout was planned in a single design phase. It accumulated addition by addition over nearly 40 years since the 1987 reopening in response to what visitors kept asking for or lingering near. That accumulation is a genuinely different growth pattern from a franchise service station counter, and it's worth naming the mechanism rather than just admiring the result. A leased retail unit inside a UK services site has a fixed footprint set by its lease and a brand template set by head office, so it can't organically add a dinosaur park even if local demand justified one. The unit exists to be replicated identically at dozens of other sites, not to grow sideways at one of them. Peggy Sue's, as a single owner-operated property with no franchise template to match, had nothing stopping it from adding a pizza parlor in one decade and a sculpture garden in another, as long as each addition paid for itself. The 2,000-plus visitor reviews the diner has accumulated on TripAdvisor alone are themselves a byproduct of that same freedom. A franchise motorway sandwich counter rarely generates a following large enough to review in the thousands because there's nothing site-specific to review. Peggy Sue's does, because every addition to the property became something a visitor could describe that wasn't true of any other stop on the route. What the gift shop is actually doing, it's worth pausing on the gift shop specifically, because it's easy to wave past it as a throwaway detail. Of course there's a gift shop when it's actually doing real work. A Route 66 keychain or postcard bought at Peggy Sue's isn't functionally different from a bag of crisps bought at a UK Services, WH Meth. Both are small, cheap, impulse-priced items sold at a captive retail counter. The difference is what the object is standing in for. The keychain references a specific road, a specific mythology, a specific decade the building is dressed as. The crisps reference nothing but themselves. That's not a judgment on which is the better business. Captive convenience retail is a perfectly sound model, and it's most of what keeps UK Services profitable overnight when the hot food counters have gone quiet. It's simply a different product. One site is selling proof you were somewhere specific, the other is selling snacks. Two systems, two different jobs. Put the two case studies side by side, and the comparison sharpens instead of flattening into America wins. The Ohio Turnpike Plaza and the UK motorway service area are solving the same regulatory problem, mandatory spaced, round-the-clock roadside access, with different operating structures, and each structure produces a predictable strength and a predictable gap. Single-operator plazas like Ohio's hold overnight consistency at the cost of variety. Multi-tenant sites like the UK's hold daytime variety and quality at the cost of overnight predictability, because the law binds the site but not every retailer inside it. Peggy Sue's isn't really part of that regulatory comparison at all. It's a category error to place it next to either system, and that's worth saying outright rather than glossing over. It survives because it's privately owned, non-mandatory, and built around being a destination rather than a requirement. Nothing forces Peggy Sue's to exist the way something forces a UK Services site to sit every 28 miles. It exists because in 1987 two people bet that travellers on I-15 wanted somewhere worth timing a stop around, and the bet worked long enough that the diner is now, per its own long tail of visitor reviews, the single highest rated restaurant in Yermo. The plaza isn't the only thing being maintained. There's a reason the Ohio Turnpike can keep making this kind of long horizon commitment, and it isn't goodwill. In 2024, the Commission finished a $250 million overhaul of its toll collection system, funded entirely out of toll revenue, not general tax dollars, replacing traditional ticket and gate booths with gateless open road tolling for EZ Pass users, who by then made up 74% of the traffic on the 241-mile route. The project cut the total number of toll plazas from 31 to 24 and eliminated staff toll collection at 9 of them entirely, a change the Commission projected would save roughly $257 million in operating costs over the following 30 years. That's a useful thing to sit next to the rest stop story because it shows the same organization making the same kind of bet twice. Spend now on infrastructure most drivers will barely notice while it's working correctly, to keep the whole system funded well enough that the parts drivers do notice. The coffee, the lights, the staffed counter at 3 a.m. don't have to be cut when budgets tighten. A toll authority that is actively investing in reducing its own long-run operating costs is a toll authority with more room to keep subsidizing a 24-hour plaza that isn't by itself a huge profit center. The rest stop's reliability isn't separate from the Turnpike's balance sheet. It's downstream of it. What a road trip channel should actually track. If you drive this corridor, Ohio Turnpike, or the LA-Vegas run past Yermo, the useful thing to notice isn't which country builds better rest stops. It's which of the two failure modes you're more likely to hit on a given night. On the Ohio Turnpike, the risk is price. You'll get served at 3 a.m., but the fast food will run close to double what you'd pay off the highway. On a UK motorway services stop, the risk is timing. The site itself will be open no matter what hour you arrive, but the specific hot food counter you wanted may have quietly gone dark 2 hours earlier, even though nothing about that is illegal. That's the kind of detail worth asking an audience for directly, not tell me your road trip memories, which invites anything and nothing, but something narrower. Which of those two failure modes has actually cost you time on a real drive? Overpaid for a 3 a.m. coffee, or showed up to a 24-hour site with nothing hot left on the shelf? That's a question with a specific, comparable answer, and the replies will sort themselves into two clean buckets instead of a scattershot comment section of unrelated nostalgia. The giant wall maps the Ohio Turnpike traveler remembers from childhood are, if anything, the detail that ages best out of all of this, not because they represent some larger truth about American hospitality, but because they were a genuinely useful piece of pre-smartphone infrastructure that a kid could stand in front of and actually use. That's a small, verifiable, non-mythologized fact, and it's a better place to end than a broad claim about about which country loves its travelers more. One more comparison is worth making explicit before closing because it's the one that actually resolves the tension this piece opened with. Both the Ohio Turnpike and the UK motorway network were built to solve the identical engineering problem of the mid-20th century, a new class of high-speed road that put drivers hours from a town and therefore hours from a toilet, a meal, or help if something broke. Both systems responded with a legal or institutional flaw: stop no more than roughly 30 to 50 miles apart, stay open around the clock, don't let distance become danger. Neither country left that to chance, and neither deserves to have that baseline erased from the comparison just because one produced a plaza with a food court and the other produced a plaza with a jukebox-shaped diner 2 hours off the interstate. What actually diverged is what happened after the floor was set, who was allowed to build on top of it, and with how much freedom. A state authority running its own concession, answerable for the whole plaza under one name, ended up optimizing for consistency: same coffee, same hours, same price structure, whether you're in West Unity or 100 miles east. A private leasehold system subletting to independent brands ended up optimizing for choice within daylight hours at the cost of coordinating everyone's overnight shift. And a single private owner with no franchise template to answer to, sitting on a stretch of desert highway with nothing forcing it to exist at all, ended up building something neither regulatory system was designed to produce: a destination people plan their route around, rather than a stop they merely tolerate. None of those three outcomes required the other two to be worse. That's the actual finding underneath 40-plus years of American rest stops are secretly great content. It was never really about which country cares more about its drivers. Both had to answer the same 1,950 seconds question about distance and safety, and both did. What's left to compare, once the legal floor is taken off the table, is just 3 different bets about ownership, and Peggy Sue's, the one bet nobody was required to make, is the one that turned into a place people cross an ocean to see.